Christmas in January, or Ichigatsu ni wa Christmas, is a really interesting look and study into how people deal with grief and loss and how it affects people around them and how people around them can help them deal with that grief and loss. Christmas in January is a 1991 OVA based off of the manga of the same name by Mariko Iwadate, released in Shueisha's Margaret magazine, the same magazine as works such as Boys Over Flowers. On a side note, I read a lot of books, and Mariko Iwadate is actually a great influence on one of my favourite Japanese authors, Banana Yoshimoto. The studio behind the OVA is Magic Bus Studios, who have been around for a very long time. As recently as 2022, working on the Yokai Watch anime, they worked on some of the Poke-tunes which came out recently, and as of late have been making quite a bit of spicy anime, if you catch my drift. Now, my main takeaway from this OVA is that it is a really great and really interesting plot, but the execution of it through the studio may not have been up to the level the plot deserved. And I'm not going to go out there and say they suck for this, because this is an early 90s OVA. I'm not expecting it to be fantastic quality, a fantastic creation, because early 90s OVAs didn't have the most money behind them, and also this was around the time the Japanese economy was about to go pop. So I can't blame them entirely for that. I do think a story like this does deserve maybe a newer, up-to-date, and more expensive rendition. So let's get into the OVA itself. As always, I'm going to be trying to avoid spoilers, so you can go off and watch this yourself, and just give you some of my own analysis and thoughts on the OVA and why you should watch it. Before we start, I do want to mention there are a couple of really sexy mustaches in this. Like early 90s OVA mustaches, love it. Wish I had a thick mustache like that. I do not, unfortunately. Also to note, we start off with casual misogyny. I do think, however, this does play into some of the characters' arcs in the OVA. I feel like in a one-shot manga, this probably would have been looked into further. But for some characters, it is throwaway, and for some characters, it is actually part of their development as a character. So when I initially saw it, I was like, oh no, it's one of those. But then by the end, I was like, okay, I guess it was the 90s, and this is part of a character arc. Christmas in January follows Junsho, a young man who is in his early 20s, working part-time in a shoe shop, and his experience over one Christmas, where he has a fateful encounter with Mizuki. Mizuki is a girl of a similar age to Junsho who seems to be slightly off-putting in her demeanor. She is withdrawn, she sometimes tries to seek attention in ways that you would think aren't common for someone in their early 20s. A little bit more childish than you would perhaps see most characters of that age being. However, as we delve deeper and deeper into the OVA, you start to understand her position and you start to understand why she acts this way. And even though the OVA never completely comes out to justify the way that Mizuki is acting throughout, it does give us reasons why she acts this way. Throughout the OVA, Mizuki is mean, she is short-tempered, but also at times she can be sweet. Also at times she is vulnerable, and Junsho sees this and he tries to wrap his head around it. He tries to wrap his head around Mizuki deciding to stay in a house with no heating by herself in the dark. He tries to go out and help her, and even Junsho's wife, well, fiance in the OVA, goes out of her way to try and help Mizuki. And although Mizuki as a character does at points want to acknowledge their help, at points she does want to acknowledge their kindness, there is something about her that is holding her back. Something that is revealed to us at the end of the OVA. From a character and storytelling perspective, this is done really well in my opinion. Throughout, you are really pushed to dislike Mizuki, and you are pushed to like Junsho. Even though the character of Junsho completely acknowledges that he is not perfect, he completely comes out at parts throughout the OVA as being short, as being curt, as maybe not acting in the best way. But Mizuki also does the same things, but she doesn't acknowledge her flaw in that. She doesn't come out and say, you know what, I was actually wrong for doing that. And I think that is the main difference you've seen between the two of them. So throughout the OVA, you want to be rooting for Junsho, and you kind of want to root for Mizuki, but also whenever she's doing something great, she then does something wrong, or at least what we perceive to be wrong. And I think this is really great storytelling, because throughout it builds and builds and builds this idea that you just can't get on Mizuki's side. And then in the last third of the OVA, you kind of see why she acts this way, and you feel sympathetic. And actually, they sprinkled that throughout the rest of the OVA. They sprinkled that throughout the rest of the story. You got hints as to why Mizuki was acting this way. And then you realize at the end, oh, all the signs were there. All the ideas were there. I just didn't put them together properly to understand why she was acting this way. Christmas in January is a really great portrayal of trauma and grief and how people deal with them, and how the people around those with trauma and grief understand and perceive those people. Because I think we've all met someone who may be going through intense grief, who maybe experience intense trauma, and we don't know how to help them. Perhaps they are like Mizuki, who doesn't actually tell you there is something wrong, so you think they're lashing out for no reason, and you kind of feel annoyed with them. And that's not entirely their own fault. Things like trauma and grief are very difficult to deal with on your own, and they're also very difficult to tell other people about. So then when you understand what they're going through, you actually feel quite sympathetic before them. But it does take that person a really big step to come out and actually discuss their grief, which is really well explored in this OVA, and basically really well explored through the plot. And I keep coming back and saying plot, because Iwadate clearly wrote a very, very great plot to the manga. And I think the plot does do a lot of the heavy lifting here. And plot does include the characters, because the characters are directly lifted from the manga. I think where there are some shortfalls are the runtime. It is a 45-minute runtime. It's actually a case where I think they could have either made it longer to make some of the intense scenes breathe a little bit more, or shortened it to try and be a little bit more snappy and make things hit harder. I think you could have gone either way, and I think it would have improved the product slightly. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I do think this manga, for its story, deserves to have a more expensive and more intricate adaptation. I do think early 90s OVAs have their charms, and those charms do shine through in this adaptation. The music, I think, is very well done. The sound is very well done. The diegetic and non-diegetic sound is very, very good. And I think that is something early 90s OVAs really, really hit hard on and do very well. But I think things like animation, I think like the character design that can maybe be improved. I know the designs in the OVA are very true to the original manga. It is very stylized, but I think that stylization can be brought even more to life, and I think it deserves to be brought to life. And again, I am not bashing Magic Bus. This was an early 90s direct-to-VHS OVA. Of course, it's not going to be the highest production quality. But this OVA isn't just about grief, and it isn't just about trauma. There are other ideas that are addressed in it. And I think, again, it is a really telling example of how strong the plot is, because it also tells the sub-story of Junsho's relationship with his best friend turned fiancée, Seiko. And that's not a spoiler, that happens very early on in the OVA. but it does really tell a very realistic story of best friends falling in love, of how people truly don't reveal their feelings to each other until push comes to shove. It takes Junsho and Seiko having what is meant to be a throwaway conversation actually turning into something more meaningful. I think we've all had those sort of conversations where you make a comment or someone makes a comment and then it just triggers a chain of events within that conversation which leads to a much bigger conversation being had. And ultimately, it comes to the two of them revealing their true emotions for each other, just from this one throwaway comment that Junsho makes at the beginning of the relationship. And I genuinely think that is such good character writing because it feels so real. And you see that with all of the characters, whether it be our main three characters, Junsho, Mizuki, and Seiko, but also the side characters, Junsho's friends. There's that one friend who is just feels bad for himself throughout, but also is a good laugh throughout. So I think the character writing and the plot is really well executed. And the only thing that holds back this OVA from being more than a 6 or 7 out of 10 is the production quality, which again, you can't fault it because it's an early 90s OVA. Ultimately, I think you should watch this OVA at least once. Frankly, when I started writing my notes for this video as I was watching the OVA, I thought this was going to be a very, very different video. But by the time I got to the very end of this OVA, and I gave myself a day or two to actually think about the story, to actually think about the characters, it turned into what it is now. It turned into be talking about how great the story of this manga is in telling the story of someone dealing with grief and trauma. How natural of a love story is told in this manga. How friends and family are portrayed in this manga. I am glad I took that day to sit back and actually evaluate what this manga is about. Because frankly, this video is a lot more positive than my early notes for it were. And there are some things that my modern sensibilities don't fully agree with in this manga, like the casual misogyny in it. But that aside, I think it is a really great telling of someone going through extreme grief, extreme trauma, and actually how those of us who are on the outside perceive that person, and how maybe we do need to change how we perceive those around us because we truly don't understand what they are going through in life. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please go and watch Christmas in January. I think you should watch it at least once. I don't think it needs to be a repeated viewing type manga. I hope you have a really great time over this holiday season. Hope you share it with friends and family, and hopefully you're not working too hard. Take the time and watch anime instead of working hard. You deserve it. It's the end of the year. Do you basically want to watch a Fast and Furious movie, but it's less than an hour and doesn't involve Dominic Toretto shouting "family" every couple of minutes? Then you should definitely check out Riding Bean. Riding Bean is a 1989 OVA directed by Hasegawa Yasao, and it follows Bean Bandit and his partner Raleigh Vincent, who are couriers for hire. So you pay them and they'll roll out in their tricked out car, the Roadbuster, to help you sort out any kind of job you've got. You want to commit a robbery and you need a getaway driver? Bean Bandit is your man. Before we get into talking about the plot of Riding Bean, I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that I absolutely adored about this. Firstly, the animation and the graphics of it. Obviously, this is a 1980s anime. It is hand-drawn, and I personally just love that style. Don't get me wrong, modern anime does look amazing as well, but it's just that it's almost nostalgic for me seeing the style that this is drawn in. I love movies like Akira, and so I think that's why I'm really drawn to this, but it is just beautifully done. The music as well is just, chef's kiss. It's obviously a product of its time. It's obviously a product of the 80s. So you got that 80s feeling to the music as well, which really adds to the environment and really adds to the feel of the show. It's just, again, these sort of things really help build the world of the OVA. And it is a 40-minute OVA, but you still feel the world has been really built up. You get a feeling for where they are. You know, it's, this feels like New York the way you're seeing it. The music feels like it's 1980s New York. It's just so good. Furthermore, in 40 minutes, you very much get a feel for all of the characters. Even the side characters, with a few exceptions, you really get an understanding of who they are and what their personality is. Especially when you're talking about the likes of Rally, who is Bean Bandit's accomplice, number 2, perhaps, in their Couriers for Hire business. You really get a feeling of Rally as a character, which is really great. And Rally even has her own spin-off show, which is Gunsmith Cats, 3-episode OVA as well, which I'll definitely be checking out afterwards. I do feel it's important for me to note here that there are some trigger warnings. This show obviously is 1980s OVA, so one, it is incredibly gory from the offset and throughout, so you know, if that's difficult for you, 100% maybe not for you. Also, there is discussions of things like child abuse. You actually see physical abuse towards a child as well. So again, if that's something that you want to avoid when watching a show, I totally understand that. Maybe avoid watching this because it is something that happens more than once throughout the 40 minutes of this OVA, so unfortunately that is something that you would want to avoid if you want to go into watching this. I wish someone had told me that before I started watching this, because I was taken aback by it from the off. And before I get into talking about the plot, I want to say one last thing in reference to that Fast and Furious comparison I made earlier. It feels like this is something Fast and Furious wishes they could make. Down to Bean Bandit's car is just so cool, and it feels believable in the world. And obviously that is the benefit of making something in animation, where you can be a little bit out there and it's still more believable than, say, I don't know, Dominic Toretto's car being able to compete with a nuclear submarine in one of the Fast and Furious movies. So I genuinely think this is something that Fast and Furious could do, like an animated Fast and Furious show with cars the style of the ones in Riding Bean. I would believe that. That would be so cool. So it's come to my attention that there is actually an animated Fast and Furious show called Fast and Furious Spy Racers. It is a Netflix original. It had 6 seasons. However, this is a children's show. So although it does meet my criteria of, hey, look, you can do it animated and this cool stuff makes more sense, you could actually do a Fast and Furious adult show. Adult animation can be done well as an action show. It doesn't just have to be a Family Guy, knockoff. And also, that's the target audience for Fast and Furious anyway. So it would be cool to service them with an animated show too. So now the plot of the OVA. I'm not going to go too far deep into it. I don't want to spoil this for you. I want you to go out and seek this and watch it, especially if this is something that is up your alley. But let's talk about it. So, as we said before, Bean Bandit and Rally Vincent are couriers who run a courier for hire business where they're using their really cool custom sports car, the Roadbuster. They will, do any job for you that requires a car. So, if you want to rob a mall or rob a bank and you need a getaway car, Bean Bandit is your man. So, in the plot, it happens to be that they are hired to escort a kidnapped girl named Chelsea back to her home. However, they seem to have been drawn into a little bit of a, how do I say this, conspiracy, perhaps? They've been tricked by a former client of theirs into, becoming the apparent perpetrators of the kidnapping. And thus, them trying to clear their name and get this girl back to safety ensues. They're also being followed by a very determined cop named Percy and his sidekick Dick, who I love their relationship in this, who really wanted to just be like, listen here, Bean Bandit, I'm trying to catch you with my Cobra car. And, that adds to the comedy of the OVA, whilst the action throughout is spectacular, including gunfights, car chases, pile-ups. There's even a grenade or two involved in this. So if that sounds like something that is up your alley, I definitely recommend you check out Riding Bean. And if you like it enough, obviously you can check out the spin-off of Gunsmith Cats, and also there was a 2021 OVA which was actually kickstarted and run by the original author Kenichi Sonoda, and it is 11 minutes long and it's called Bean Bandit, and apparently it's great and definitely a love letter to his own works. So you can check that out too if you really like Riding Bean. Again, it's only 11 minutes, unfortunately, so it's not going to really give you as much of time with these characters as Riding Bean, but hey, getting more of something that you enjoyed is always great. So check out Riding Bean. Like I said earlier, there are definitely trigger warnings when it comes to things like abuse and child abuse, so if that is something that, you don't want to watch, and I totally understand that, maybe give this a miss. But, if you are still interested in watching the show, definitely check out Riding Bean. Have you ever seen Japanese education propaganda? Well, look no further than Proof of Us, the anime commercial. This is a 5-minute short/commercial where basically the whole message of it is to encourage children to study hard in school. Hey, telling kids to study hard in school is not a bad thing, but I think conflating the fact that, hey, if you study hard in school, you might have a romantic relationship is just the funniest thing to me. Because we know in Japan that they are having birth rate issues, and we also know that students are severely overworked in Japan. A study showed that 39% of university students in Japan are suffering from severe mental illness. And the anime being a basically propaganda piece telling kids, hey guys, study hard in school, that person who you have a crush on will love you and they'll come after you and they'll change schools just to go to school with you. And look, honestly, the anime itself is very wholesome, it's very sweet, it's animated by Flat Studio, it is done very well. There is a music track in the background for the duration of the 4 minutes 54 seconds, I believe, is how long this is, and it's a very, very good song. And the animation quality itself, really good, top notch. It's got this very cool style. It's a little bit washed out at points, but also I feel like the washing out of the colors reflects the mental state of the characters, which actually is a very positive aspect of this, because it doesn't present school as this very, it's great all the time, but also it doesn't really show how much these students truly struggle in Japan, because again, my knowledge is from research. I tried to get some statistics, but Statista wanted me to pay for Statista Pro, and I can't afford that. But if you want me to afford Statista Pro, you should like and subscribe to the channel, so then I can eventually get to affording Statista Pro, huh? But plug aside, the show, well, it's not even a show, the commercial doesn't really show a huge struggle. It shows them struggling with the subjects, but it doesn't really show these kids like going through the proper trials and tribulations that you see in school everywhere, maybe particularly in Japanese school because of the long hours, the need to go to clubs after school, and then also some people, or a good chunk of people, go to cram school as well. It's not really showing that in this, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer for this entire video, but it just felt like it was lacking that little bit of realism. And I get it, because it's a commercial to encourage children to study hard in school and do well in school and get an education. And I am not saying that's a bad thing. Hey, I wish I listened more, I studied harder in school as well. This maybe would have worked on me as propaganda, to be honest, but it is a little bit strange that you're using an anime for the propaganda to keep kids in school when maybe the best solution is to reduce the number of hours the children need to be studying, reduce the strictness of exams to get into higher universities, reduce the stigma against people who don't go to the top universities in Japan, and help the kids with their mental health. Maybe that would help them enjoy studying a little bit more, as opposed to giving them a pretty nice anime, a pretty nice piece of education propaganda. I'll give you that. Talking more about the actual structure of the anime itself, though, there is one thing I did have a problem with, and it was the editing. I know they only had under 5 minutes for this, but the editing was way too fast. It was going from scene to scene to scene. There were characters being introduced, and there was one character who I thought was the main male protagonist, and I was like, that's the same character, right? And then I think by the end, I watched it twice. I was like, I think that's a different person, but I am not 100% sure. But then at the end, I think they made it clear they were a different person, but I don't really know if they were a different person or they were the figment of the female protagonist's imagination, and I'm not too sure with that. That was my main gripe with this, other than the message being like, hey kids, if you study hard, all your problems will be done. You'll get that girl or you'll get that boy. Don't worry about it, guys. There's nothing else to do it. But it genuinely felt like the story was very much this, yeah guys, study hard, have kids, and we know Spy Family is jokingly referred to as Shinzo Abe's final legacy of have kids reproduce. And this kind of felt like that version, but for an education. But like I said, the editing, a little bit too fast. The color grading, well, it's not even color grading, it's an anime. The color choice I liked. I think maybe if the editing was a little bit slower so I could really appreciate some of the color choices, because some of the scenes, they had this drained feeling to them, but it very quickly went to it being a little bit brighter, and I like the contrast, but I couldn't really appreciate the color difference because it was cutting so fast. And I get that because, like I said earlier, it is a 5-minute short / commercial, so you don't really have time to linger on a shot, do you, unless it's a very important shot. And the final shot, actually, it does linger a little bit, and it's quite cute, and it is very much something that I feel like some fans would ship the characters. I mean, it's very obvious they're maybe getting together. The other thing that's a little bit confusing is the time scale and time frame, but that also might be because I'm not in Japan, so that might be a cultural thing that I'm missing. I feel like it follows the characters from elementary school up until maybe university. I'm pretty sure it follows them up until university, but because of things like outfit choice, like some of the characters aren't actually wearing school uniforms and the rest of them are. So I think maybe that's a cultural thing I'm a little bit confused by. And I did a little bit of research into it, but because it's a commercial, it's kind of difficult to find much more than the Mal post on it. And I think there was one Reddit thread, but the Reddit thread didn't really go into deep detail on that. So I'm a little bit confused by the timescale, but again, that might be a cultural thing. But I would go into it with the assumption that it follows these students from elementary school to university entrance. So actually being able to cover that amount of time and tell a cohesive story in 5 minutes is impressive. I just feel like if you're going to tell this story, if you're really doing it from an artistic standpoint, you would properly dive into the problems that these characters have. But at the end of the day, this is a propaganda piece to get kids to study hard in school, so I can't really question it all too much for not being, the most compelling narrative in 5 minutes. But yeah, I thought I'd talk to you guys about that Japanese propaganda piece to keep kids in school and maybe use it to influence them to have relationships, because, they desperately need it. But like I said, maybe the main focus should be helping those students with that 39% of students struggling with their mental health. I think that would drastically improve kids wanting to go to have an education as opposed to an anime, but what do I know? I'm not in the government yet. Are you looking for an anime that'll make you go, why did I spend 50 minutes watching that this Halloween? Then look no further than 1991's Dark Cat. Dark Cat was a show produced by Iku Suzuki, who in their early career did a lot of directing and now does mostly storyboarding. It's a horror OVA. It's definitely a product of the times, early 90s, 80s OVAs were all the thing, manga one-shots or original OVAs being produced and being released. It, is definitely from the 90s. So, Dark Cat follows two brothers who are dark cats, who are like these mystical beings who can turn from human to dark cat. I'm not 100% sure they're human because look at them. I don't think these guys are human compared to some of the other characters, but it basically follows them in their quest to try and find out the source of this great evil they're sensing in a high school in Japan. So as always, I don't want to spoil the show for you, because if you want to watch it after listening to this, maybe go and watch it. So I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I'm going to talk to you about some stuff that I noticed and stuff that I really liked and stuff that I thought was a bit, oh, okay, definitely a 90s OVA type deal. So let's kind of go in with the things I like. I like that we start with a bang. The first 2 to 3 minutes of this OVA is bang, 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 intrigue, super great way to open an OVA, super great way to open a show. It draws you in. I want to keep watching, even if it definitely slows down a lot after the opening. Opening really hooked me. Secondly, I really like the design of the two brothers we follow who are dark cats. They definitely stand out a lot. They definitely feel mystical. They feel very different compared to some of the other designs that you get for other characters who are mystical. I don't want to go too deep into it. They stand out a lot, especially the older brother. So I think that's a really positive. The visuals of the OVA definitely feel early 90s. It definitely felt like it didn't have the biggest budget. You can definitely make a really great looking anime, a really great looking OVA on a lower budget, but it just, and also it might have just been the quality I was watching it in, so I won't knock it too badly on this. But when I look back at something like Riding Bean, where everything just feels and looks like nostalgic and retro, this felt a little bit more like, ooh, I don't know how much budget you guys had for this. So it's not horrible, but I felt like, could have been better. But the designs themselves weren't too bad. Talking about visuals, there was a section in the middle of the OVA where it goes to watercolors, and I thought that was actually really cute and really well done. It's for a reason. You kind of see why it moved to watercolor slightly a minute after it goes to watercolors, which, it definitely fits the vibe of what's happening, and it was actually very cute and very quaint, and it was nice to kind of see something slightly different be put into the OVA. That's kind of why I like OVAs. They experiment a lot, sometimes throwing in different art styles, even if it's just for a brief moment, definitely aligning with the plot. But I think that's a really great way of going about it. Tangentially related to visuals, but not at all, we're talking about the music. So there's a couple of songs that come out throughout the OVA, which I think are great. I'm not 100% sure they fit the vibe of the OVA, but they definitely are a good vibe to listen to. And again, something else you notice when you're watching these 80s, 90s OVAs, they really put effort into the soundtrack and the quality of the songs. Maybe they don't fully fit the vibe of what's going on, but the songs themselves are oh, this is good, this is catchy. It's definitely something where I would imagine in the early 90s you'd be like, I want to pick up the cassette, or they must have had CDs in the early 90s of this OVA. Let's say cassette. I definitely want to pick up the cassette of this OVA.
There's a rainbow there when hate's not in the air.
So those are the two things I like the most that were outside of the plot and the themes. Let's talk about a couple of things that I was a bit iffy on that were outside of the plot and themes. So I feel like their use of transitions were a little bit lopsided. Certain characters got really cool transformation animation, and some characters they were like, we don't have the budget for you. Which I guess, you know, if you look at some of the horror visuals, they look incredible. But then if you look at some of the transformations of the Dark Cat, it's like, oh, slightly more effort could have been put into this. So when it comes from a horror aspect, it's gruesome, it's gnarly at points. Really love that. I think that's definitely like the highest point of it. But when it comes to some of the transformation for some of the Dark Cats, it's a little bit underwhelming. Like, you could have really lent into that as well. That would have added to the mysticism of them, the kind of the atmosphere as well. But, you know, I'm assuming a lot of the animators' time went into these gruesome, horrible, disgusting evil spirits that they put together. So I guess, you know, you take some, you leave some, but you know, there's one transformation that's awesome for the Dark Cat, and then there's another one where it's like, oh, it feels like Blue Lock animation.
Wait. What the hell?
And you know what? That was my main non-plot gripe with the OVA. So actually, not too much bad to come out of it. I kind of acknowledge that, you know, it seemed like a slightly lower budget early 90s OVA, so the visuals aren't going to be spectacular. There is some stuff that looks great, and there's some stuff that's a little bit underwhelming, unfortunately. Like, the art in itself is sometimes a little bit underwhelming. You know, again, feels a little bit like Blue Lock. But I think we can move on to the plot and the themes, which I would really love to discuss. In terms of pacing, it definitely felt like they were trying to fill the 50 minutes they had. So everything sort of fit neatly and nicely into the time they had. So it didn't feel like it dragged too much, but there were certain aspects I felt were added to the OVA that necessarily didn't need to be there, but they might have been added to kind of sell the OVA, or maybe, you know, sell the original, writing the original manga. So there's a fight scene towards the end where I guess, like, it's cool and all, but it didn't necessarily need to be there. It took away from the emotional high point I felt at the very end of the OVA, which I felt slightly more time could have been given to that to really make it hit home. There was use of the very common theme of, you know, there's evil within us, but we can fight against it. And even if there were things that are really pushing us towards, you know, acting out on these harmful desires we may have, or, you know, we're so put down, we're so upset that we're going to lash out about them, and our evil spirit grows because of that. You know, it's a pretty common thing within anime theming, so it hits it. It does it pretty well. I think there's a twist at the very end of the OVA, which was like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting that, and that definitely lent into that theme of evil and trying to combat the evil within us, and that we can overcome these negative emotions, these negative desires we have, and, you know, if we have those around us to help us, it makes it even easier. And that really is the message at the very end. And it kind of is shown through our evil desires, our evil feelings, our sadness, our pain, our anger is shown visually through these disgusting, very phallic monsters, which, I mean, might be another hint at, you know, talking about certain people who may be acting out on their very negative desires. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But yeah, it's very well portrayed, and then after that it shows, you know, kind of a purity through friendship and love, but I don't want to go too much into that because it's actually quite a nice visual to end the OVA, which I don't want to spoil if you're going to go off and watch it. And another theme that they touched on, which I do feel I wish they'd gone into more detail into, but again, you only had a 50-minute runtime, is kind of this nature versus urban environment. So a lot of the evil spirits and the darkness and the monsters come out in the cities, areas where people have congregated en masse, and oftentimes, you get these kind of negative emotions in a city sometimes where, everyone's busy about their day, people don't really have time for each other, and like sadness and anger festers, versus nature, the forest, where the protagonists are able to kind of purify themselves and heal and recover in the forest. There's, a forest spirit mommy in there as well, which we love to see. So I quite like that it was touching on that. I wish maybe they had a longer runtime and could have explored that a bit more. That kind of was a 5-minute period, and then we were back in the city. We were back fighting monsters inside the city. Kind of just something that would have been nice to get a little bit more of an explanation and a little bit more of exploration of that point. This is all to say that I actually went into recording this, and actually after watching Dark Cat, with a slightly more negative opinion of the show. I gave it a 2 on my anime list, but now that I've kind of spoken about it to you guys, I actually think it's a little bit more than a 2. I don't think it's that bad. I think in the context with which it was an early 90s OVA from a company which went bankrupt shortly after this came out, clearly didn't have the biggest budget to make this. Actually, it's not that bad of a 4A. I don't think it's a 2. It might be a 3 or a 4. So not excellent, but not horrible. Not a horrible watch. So, if you're interested in watching Dark Cat, you can check it out. Let me know in the comments down below if you have watched Dark Cat. And if you haven't, let me know if you're going to go watch it. Make sure you do something spooky this Halloween. Watch some creepy monsters in a 50-minute OVA that you can definitely find online. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You can find it on a certain streaming platform you may be on at the moment. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Thank you for watching, and go watch some Dark Cat, baby! Kizuna, or in English, Ties, is a 5-minute short from Gaku Kineshita, and I'll be honest, I wasn't prepared to cry today. I'm not going to spoil this. I think you should just go off and watch it. I'm going to link down below somewhere to watch this. It's available on YouTube, and I'll put it at the end of this video. But truly, So this short was created in memorial to the people who lost their lives on the 3rd of March 2011 in the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. For those of you who may not have been old enough to remember this, me as a British person, I remember seeing the pictures coming out of Tohoku. I remember seeing just the absolute devastation from it, and the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami truly rocked Japan as a nation. It a group of people go through devastation, and it completely reshapes how their society thinks and functions. And with Japan, that's happened a few times, obviously, in the past 100 years, whether it be the nuclear bombs, it being the Fukushima meltdown, the Tohoku earthquake. It is truly devastating. And we see these things happening in our society nowadays. We're seeing devastation across the world, and the takeaway from this short is, it's a quote that comes up at the very end, and it's not going to spoil anything, but it's, "A story passed on is a living memorial," and this short was created in memoriam to the people who lost their lives in Tohoku and other parts of Japan, obviously. This short does that really well. It's 5 minutes, there's no dialogue, it's all set on the backdrop of a song, which the song in itself is absolutely beautiful. But the visuals themselves, also the animation, is sort of kind of, I don't know how to describe the type of animation it is, but the panels will move, but also there is movement within the panels. But the art itself is very unique. It's beautiful. The colors used, the palette at points becomes sepia tone, and contrasts very differently to the bright, warm palette used at other parts in this short. And truly just devastatingly moving. And like I was saying, this idea of a story passed on is a living memorial is true now just as it was in 2011. We are seeing people losing their lives, people suffering, and the stories of these people keep them alive. The stories these people tell, whether it be the art they create or just their voices, their just everything about them, remembering them is important because it keeps them alive, for not just for their loved ones but people in general. And I think that is the story of this short. I don't want to go into too much detail because I'll be honest, I was watching this going in only having seen the poster and someone saying go and watch this, and I was not prepared to be as moved as I was when watching this. And I knew this was about this was made in memoriam to the people who lost their lives in Tohoku, so I knew I was prepared for something like that, but I wasn't prepared for how I would feel. So again, go and watch this. I'm usually so composed when I'm making these videos, but go and watch this. I highly recommend it, and just take the meaning of this short to heart. Tabimachi Late Show is all about goodbyes. It is full of melancholy, it is full of longing, it is all about how goodbyes aren't just for the moment in which you say goodbye. Goodbyes linger with you for a very, very long time, perhaps even your entire life. Tabimachi Late Show is created by Comic Studios, so the exact same studio that creates Shinkai's films, and you can tell these are so lovingly animated. They are very short, they are less than 10 minutes of each 4 short stories you're told about, and truly it is something I think you should watch at any point in life, and you'll really understand the heartfelt, emotional nature of a goodbye. So we have 4 different shorts. One of them is of a mentor recalling her own mentor as she sees off her own student to pursue their dreams. Another one is about a very short and turbulent relationship between 2 friends, and both of them looking back on it and, maybe some regrets they had. The third one is of 2 children at a summer festival, and I can't spoil that one. That one is too emotional for me to go into further details. And the last one is about a teacher who is impending her retirement, and it's her recalling all of the students she's had over the years. Every single one of these stories hit on a different type of goodbye, whether it be a goodbye where you're looking back on something fondly, a goodbye where perhaps you have regrets, and a goodbye where you are unsure about the future. But that's the beauty of goodbyes. They are full of these swirls of emotions, and no matter how old you are, whether you're the children in episode 3 or you're an elderly person like in episode 4, goodbyes are so powerful, and goodbyes can truly hurt, and they can truly feel great as well. And that's why I loved this so much. Sure, I would have loved more shorts, I would have loved more stories, I would have loved more aspects of goodbyes to be discovered, to be looked into, but the 4 episodes I got, they were really heartfelt, and they really stick with me still. I watched these a good 3 or 4 months ago. And even now, I always think, oh, that third episode in particular for me really hit hard. So I want you to go off and watch the Tabimachi Late Show. It is really great. Again, they're all very short, less than 10 minutes each, so you can get through all 4 episodes in one sitting. Let me know what you think of them if you have watched them, and if you do watch them, come back here and leave your comments down below. This is a goodbye from me to you, but it's only a goodbye until the next episode. But I hope it leaves you with something. It's the holiday season, so we're going to be watching something a little bit more cozy, especially compared to the last video. We're going to be watching Ouran the Cat Player. Try and say that really fast 5 times, because it's very hard. This anime is just, it felt like a warm musical hug. I was going into it thinking, this is going to be whatever, it's going to be a bit of a whatever video, a whatever OVA, and it was just incredible. So firstly, I'm going to talk to you about the OVA itself, and then I'm going to give you my interpretation, and you're going to want to stick around for that interpretation at the end, because by God, I've got one where I did some research and it is crazy, so you're going to have to stick around for that. Ouran the Cat Player is a 1992 OVA by JC Staff, known for Sing a Bit of Harmony, the movie, Konosuba, and also Slayers. So a couple of bangers right there, especially Konosuba if you want something a little bit funny. The OVA was directed by Mizuko Nishikubo, who actually worked on Ghost in the Shell 1 and 2, also worked on Kill Bill, and another OVA that you're going to get a video on in the somewhat near future, so I won't mention it. The OVA is based off the work of Baku Yume Makura, who is well known for work such as Goroden. Both of the 2 people I've just mentioned we will talk about later when it comes to my interpretation / conspiracy. So let's talk about the OVA itself. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but I am going to give you some good vibes, and I will tell you about maybe the first 2 to 3 minutes of the OVA. So the OVA follows a cellist whose orchestra has just closed down right before Christmas. It is winter, it is cold, and he is feeling down because, his orchestra was his life, it was his work, and thus he is trying to drown his sorrows with some booze. He drops the coin he was going to spend on his booze, it rolls away, and where does it end up? At the feet of an alcoholic cat. I am not joking, an alcoholic cat, and I would die for this cat. It is adorable. It is arguably my favourite thing about this OVA behind the music. Through his meeting with the alcoholic cat, a cellist, whose name is the cellist in the OVA, runs into Ouran, the cat player, and if you can't guess from that, Ouran, whose name I'm going to struggle to say throughout this, plays cats for a living, or at least he plays cats for people's entertainment. So, through meeting Ouran, the cellist decides to, go check out what he's on about. What he's on about his little rendezvous at a pub a couple of days later. And there, you experienced one of the most surreal things you'll ever watch in your life. Ouran plays the cats like they were an instrument, kind of like a keyboard in the first instance, and it is, the visuals are incredible. It is like you are transported to another world, and I think this is a really great way of almost showing the cellist's mind frame. I don't think they actually travel to different worlds through the music of these cats, but these cats move the cellist so much with their amazing singing that he is visualizing this just beautiful stuff. And the animation is definitely early 90s, not very expensive animation, but it just, the way it blends with the music and how much it contrasts to the rest of the animation at that point in the OVA, it's just so stellar. It is so warm. It is so inviting to the watcher. I was genuinely surprised. And matching that with the music, with the singing of the cats, which unfortunately I can't actually play for you because of copyright issues. But trust me, it is just chef's kiss. The singing, the music at that point and throughout the entire OVA is divine, genuinely. That all happens within the first 7 to 8 minutes of this OVA. It is only a 30-minute OVA, so I don't really want to spoil much more of the plot for you. So all the images I'm going to use going forward, I'm going to try and use sort of out of context and also maybe sticking to that first 8 minutes. But I do have to touch on, there was a second musical section where the animation and just the visuals is a complete contrast to the rest of the show. I will show you a couple of instances of that, but it genuinely, it fits and it is great. And one of the cats is played like a guitar, and I just talking about it, I feel happy because it was such a uplifting mood. There is some tension, I would say. There is some, strife that our characters need to go through. You can't really tell a story without that being present. But still, the overwhelming feeling of warm fuzziness this OVA gives me, even when there are issues that arise, there is some conflict. It just felt so great watching this. Honestly, if you just want to feel good this holiday season, watch this. It just, I can't not reiterate that so much. And yeah, that was just the first 8 minutes. I felt that. The rest of the OVA just reiterated that. There were some absolutely stunning visuals. The way they use snow to reflect emotion, the way they use sound to match with that snow. Incredible. Like, even just for the music, watch it. It is so good, especially for a 30-minute OVA from the early 90s. Now it's time for us to lock in. I've spoken about the OVA itself. Now I want to talk to you about my interpretations. There are two. One which is kind of bat crazy, and another one which I think is actually an actual much closer interpretation. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much information about this OVA. There was only one thing I could find, and it's a blog post, which is a review of the OVA, which doesn't have too much information. I could not find an interview with the original author of the story, and I could not find an interview with the director. The only thing I could find was someone writing a master's thesis about the original writing, the original story by the author. However, he only mentions this OVA in passing, or at least the story this OVA is based on, in like one sentence. So this is entirely my own conjecture, so do not take this super seriously. But I think this OVA is a commentary on the collapse of the Japanese economy. Now, hear me out. Let me cook. So, Japanese economy crashes in 1992. This comes out at the end of 1992. You might say, that doesn't really line up. Well, economies don't just suddenly crash. Well, sometimes they do, but you usually have a build-up, and the Japanese economy crashed with a couple years build-up. Basically, in about 1989 was when the crash started happening, when people started being unemployed, when people started being fired from their jobs. Now, throughout this OVA, there is basically the recurring theme of people losing their jobs, people struggling financially and not knowing what to do with their lives, trying to pursue what they love and their passions, but the economy is bad and you can't even afford booze. Talking about booze, our protagonist is trying to initially drown his sorrows in booze and then meets an alcoholic cat. The drinking is caused by him losing his job. It is also a reflection on drinking culture in Japan and how it is somewhat influenced by the economic crash from the 90s, which has still led to a current lost 3 decades in Japan. This is a commentary on the crash of the Japanese economy and how it affected employment and how it caused people to leave the city. Now, a more sensible interpretation of this OVA is finding your passion and following that passion and finding your purpose through that. It is pursuing the thing you love because you love doing it and because you love it to your soul, and how that is so much better than just trying to do it for monetary gain. And although monetary gain is important, if you follow your passion, you'll be so much more satisfied. That is what I think is the true, or at least the better interpretation of this OVA. Look, I've not read the source material. Maybe it is much clearer. The source material was written in 1979, so obviously the source material definitely has nothing to do with the economic crash in Japan. If anything, it is probably closer to being about the economic miracle in Japan. But the OVA, coming out literally at the end of the year, the crash popped completely, the bubble completely popped. I'm just saying, there's got to be something there. So if you want something super cozy to watch this holiday season, and it's only 30 minutes, but I also think it's something you can watch on repeat. It could be something you watch every single year, kind of like The Snowman, if you are English too. That's like a thing that's very short, but everyone in England watches it. Well, Britain watches it at Christmas time. I think this could be something that you could watch every year at Christmas time. It's 30 minutes. It's great. Go and watch it. Then come back here and tell me about your interpretation of it and how you agree that it is all about the economic crash in Japan and the effects of the economic crash on the average person. Thank you for watching. Go and watch this OVA because it was so fun, so calming, so cozy, so winter. It's the first thing I watched that has made me feel like, you know what, we are in the holiday season, and I will always be thankful of Ouran for giving me that this year and hopefully for many years to come. Ba-chan no Kingyo, or Grandmother's Goldfish, is such a heartwarming and beautiful short. It's 8 minutes long. It is directed and produced by Kaori Iwasa, who unfortunately I can't really find too much information on. I'm trying to find other things she's worked on, but unfortunately her Twitter is empty and her personal website doesn't seem to be loading. So if you know anything else she's worked on, let me know in the comments down below. It is a story about a grandmother and her goldfish, and as premise so simple, is executed so brilliantly. It is adorable, and it is heartwarming, it is emotional, it is sad. The story, basically, without spoiling it, is all about childhood memories. It is about remembrance, self-reflection, especially, I suppose, for a character who seems to be in her elderly years. You know, she's being cared for by what I assume is her granddaughter, maybe child, and the way she is looking back on her own memories in the past and feeling those emotions, and how this goldfish actually represents that time in her youth and represents her aging and her growth. The fish in itself grows significantly, and I think, in my opinion, that is a reflection of her own growth as an individual, because when we see the fish as a child, it is small, and it is large now that she's older. The whole sequence, we assume, is a dream sequence. And in that dream sequence, I think it's beautifully animated. The music is beautiful. The music really made me feel moved. I believe I wrote in my clips, I genuinely felt my heart, getting that sinking feeling you get when you feel moved, just elicited by the music in this short. The other thing I absolutely adore is the backgrounds. I've really come to appreciate backgrounds in anime recently because I've been watching Spilled Ink, and they've had a Ghibli anime background artist on there recently. But the backgrounds in this anime is done in this sort of saturated kind of watercolors / pencil style, and the characters, especially the grandmother and the fish, really stand out on the style, and it really like focuses you on them. The water also stands out in the show, the short. It is so beautiful. I highly recommend it. It is only 8 minutes long, so if you can, go off and watch Bacha no Kingyo or Grandmother's Goldfish. It is really heart moving. I mean, maybe if you have an older relative as well, maybe show it to them, because I feel like obviously this is something they might be like, yeah, you know what, I get what she's feeling. Yeah, I feel like that also. I feel like an elderly relative might really appreciate this. Today we are talking about an absolutely beautiful short called Anemone. This short was directed by Junichi Yamamoto. You may know him. He has worked as an episode director on some really big shows like Mushoku Tensei, Pokemon Evolution, and Batman Ninja. And actually the fact that he's worked on those latter two will be important for some commentary I have on this at the end. Anemone, in short, is a 5-minute short that is a metaphor for dealing with depression. And I don't want to get too much into that aspect of it, at least plot-wise, because I think it's important. But the story, we are basically in this world that is dark and drab, and it is confusing. You are all over the place. You don't know where you're going. Our protagonist doesn't know what she is doing. There are these mysterious figures there, but you can't really tell who they are. You can't see their faces. It is completely confusing until our protagonist meets a rabbit man, which I personally feel is a call out to Alice in Wonderland. And Alice in Wonderland, many people speculate, is meant to be about a psychiatric patient. I don't necessarily think that is actually the case, what Lewis Carroll was going for, but people speculate that to be the case. But anyway, she meets this rabbit man, and the rabbit man takes her to a time where she meets her younger self. And actually, this is where I want to pivot slightly, because when she goes to meet her younger self is the first time I recognized the use of 3D assets. So up until this point, it seemed very much like you had this beautiful watercolored backgrounds and watercolored sort of style for our characters we see on the screen. But once you go to the past, we're introduced to these 3D assets being used, whether it be just the younger version of herself, but also in the backgrounds we see many things that are 3D. And I do think going forward there's a lot more 3D use from this part of the short. I don't know if that was for budgetary constraints, because 3D animation is somewhat cheaper than 2D animation, especially 14 years ago when this short came out. But also, it felt like it was used as a way to present a shift in the character, as if the character was developing, moving forward, was becoming more than, getting to the next place they want to be, kind of like how 3D animation was supposed to be this shift forward from 2D animation. And I think Yamamoto, going on to work on shows like Pokemon Evolution, and particularly Batman Ninja, as a scene director and an episode director, really leans into the idea that he wanted to push forward with 3D animation, and implementing that into this short was him representing that through the short itself. I won't talk any more on the plot of the short because I feel like that will spoil the ending, but the short really is a great way of demonstrating the confusion, the darkness, the how do I deal with my depression aspect of life. So it's really powerful. It's very short. There is no dialogue. It is all music based with diegetic and non-diegetic sound, obviously. And the music is very beautiful and very suited to the scenes. Music direction is maybe an underrated part of animation and just filmmaking in general. I think people will appreciate OSTs, soundtracks and stuff, but they won't really appreciate the soundtrack that is actually a part of the storytelling, if you will. So go off and watch Anemone. I will link it down below for you to go and watch. It is beautiful, it is stunning, it is sad, but it's also uplifting. So thank you for watching. Go watch Anemone and let me know in the comments down below after you've watched it your thoughts on it.